Okay, so today we are going to talk about Machiavelli versus chance, or fate, or luck, or what have you. And, a lot of times, so this is something that was brought to our attention by Leo Strauss, right? And by the way, right here, this man is Thug Life Leo Strauss. And I'm a Straussian, hashtag West Saida. And quite often, I will speak casually and I will refer to fate, right? Like Straussians will. And just, as a point of interest here to begin the video, I just figured I would mention that in philosophy, fate is often used as a synonym to chance or luck, right? Because it's a little bit more poetic, right? It sort of grabs the drama of situations better than the word chance does, right? Like, I would say that it's my fate to be an American and have grown up in San Diego. But I could also say that those things happened to me by chance, right? So it's in that sense that we use all these terms. And I think I will read from Strauss first, and then read Machiavelli's comments. I think that's the best way to go about this. And I was able to get this essay from him some time ago. I'll link it in the description. It's called The Three Waves of Modernity. Right, is that what it's called? Yeah, The Three Waves of Modernity. And it's from a collection of essays, a book. What's the book called? An Introduction to Political Philosophy, 10 Essays by Leo Strauss. That's where it comes from, but I was able to get this in a PDF, and I will link it in the description. And so Strauss says about Machiavelli, here's what he says. He says, there are two utterances of Machiavelli which indicate his broad intentions with the greatest clarity. The first is to this effect. Machiavelli is in profound disagreement with the view of others regarding how a prince should conduct himself toward his subjects or friends. The reason for this disagreement is that he is concerned with the factual, practical truth and not with fancies. Many have imagined commonwealths and principalities which never were because they looked at how men ought to live instead of how men do in fact live. Machiavelli opposes to the idealism of traditional political philosophy a realistic approach to political things. But this is only half of the truth, or in other words, his realism is of a peculiar kind. The other half is stated by Machiavelli in these terms. Fortuna is a woman who can be controlled by the use of force. To understand the bearing of these two utterances, one must remind oneself of the fact that classical political philosophy, I lost it, you guys. One must remind oneself of the fact that classical political philosophy was a quest for the best political rule, or the best regime as a regime most conducive to the practice of virtue, or of how men should live, and that, according to classical political philosophy, the establishment of the best regime depends necessarily on uncontrollable, elusive fortuna, or chance. According to Plato's Republic, the coming into being of the best regime depends on the coincidence, the unlikely coming together of philosophy and political power. The so-called realist Aristotle agrees with Plato in these two... where'd it go? I'm getting it here. It's on my computer, it's goofy. The so-called realist Aristotle agrees with Plato in these two most important respects. The best regime is the order most conducive to the practice of virtue, and the actualization of the best regime depends on chance. For, according to Aristotle, the best regime cannot be established if the proper matter is not available. That is, if the nature of the available territory and of the available people is not fit for the best regime. Whether or not that matter is available depends in no way on the art of the founder, but on chance. Machiavelli seems to agree with Aristotle by saying that one cannot establish the desirable political order if the matter is corrupt. That is, if the people are corrupt. But what for Aristotle is an impossibility is for Machiavelli only a very great difficulty. The difficulty can be overcome by an outstanding man who uses extraordinary means in order to transform a corrupt matter into a good matter. That obstacle to the establishment of the best regime, which is man as matter, the human material, can be overcome because that matter can be transformed. Right, so that's from Strauss, and just a side note, that is actually one of the most important respects in which Aristotle is similar to Plato. Hey, everywhere you go, people are like, "Oh, Plato and Aristotle, they're so different." Right? Like Aristotle was a rejection of Platonism, but really in this decisive respect, they're similar. Right? They both believed that the ideal regime depended on chance, right? And that it was in reference to something that has never existed and will probably never actually exist, right? And so Machiavelli is responding to them, and I just want to take a moment and explain here before I read Machiavelli's remarks. But so what happens is that Machiavelli, he rejects these abstract notions of justice. Right? He's only concerned with what actually happens, right? And that came to characterize Enlightenment thought, right? It's not really discussed that often how much the Enlightenment was influenced by Machiavelli. And what happened was that in order to have an idea of society, an ideal of society that can actually come into existence, what happened was they lowered the standards, right? If we lowered the standards for what we want from society, then it can actually come to exist, right? And so what I'm talking about is especially focusing on, for instance, rights, right? If your idea of an ideal society is one where the minimum needs of everyone are taken care of, like Enlightenment thought is, then it can potentially come into existence. But the issue is that life does not consist in the minimum things, right? And actually being accurate about conceiving an ideal society would involve considering the more noble things, right? The great things, right? Not just limiting ourselves to satisfying our minimum needs, right? That's actually like the lowest standard. So yeah, so we'll hear from Machiavelli here a little bit. Like Strauss said, there's two lines from Machiavelli. This first one is where he rejects Platonism. It's in chapter 15 of The Prince. Right? And what are we looking at here? Where do I want to start? I got this. All right, so he says, since my intention is to write something useful for anyone who understands it, it seemed more suitable to me to search after the effectual truth of the matter rather than its imagined one. And many writers have imagined for themselves republics and principalities that have never been born nor known to exist in reality. For there is such a gap between how one lives and how one ought to live that anyone who abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. Right? So that's the first line from Machiavelli. And I should mention that the reason Machiavelli wrote The Prince was to convince one of the people from the De Medici family to basically conquer Italy and reunite Italy, right? So there was a practical agenda to writing The Prince, right? It was actually intended to be for this one man's consumption and to convince him to conquer Italy, and it did not actually work out, but that was the point. That's why it's all about what actually happens in practical politics, right? And so the other line from Machiavelli is over here in chapter 25, right? And this is the one where he talks about chance. Okay? He says, I am certainly convinced of this, that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, because fortune is a woman, and it is necessary in order to keep her down, to beat her and to struggle with her. And it is seen that she more often allows herself to be taken over by men who are impetuous than by those who make cold advances. And then, being a woman, she is always the friend of young men, for they are less cautious, more aggressive, and they command her with more audacity. Right? So that is Machiavelli talking about the struggle with chance, right? As though chance is a woman. And here we go. So, anyway, so the point is that Machiavelli is really a central figure in political thought, and political thought really, or serious thought in general, really comes down to political thought, right? I don't think it's insignificant that Machiavelli, in writing his famous political book, uses the occasion to criticize Plato's theory of the ideas or the forms, right? Because it's like it doesn't really matter if there's a form of a chair or of a table. What's the issue is really whether or not there is the idea of justice or the good, right? That's really the importance of the ideas. And people dwell on Plato's ideas as though they are non-political, but really, though, I think I hadn't thought about it this way until I was reviewing for this video, but really think Machiavelli really gets to the heart of criticizing Plato here, right? When he criticizes Plato's ideas in relation to politics, right? So now, all this being said, right, this isn't just like, oh, I'm hating on Machiavelli because, like I'm down for Machiavelli, right? I love his book, The Prince, that I've been holding up here, right? I refer to myself as Straussiavelli, right? Maybe what Machiavelli did was the right thing to do at the time, right? Maybe what he should have done was, write this exhortation to the Medicis in order to get them to conquer Italy, right? Maybe it was right for him to lower our view of politics because it ended up serving as the rationalization for a lot of fine political change that followed, right? The ushering in of the Enlightenment was an era of what we would have to say was preferable political change compared to what came before it, right? But the thing is that the Enlightenment was a rationalization for rule by certain people. We know them as the bourgeois, right? They needed an explanation for why they should rule, and Machiavelli was the first person to formally offer such a thing, and that's what philosophy became, right? Political philosophy became a rationalization for the bourgeois to rule, as opposed to being concerned with the actual truth of the matter, right? Which is what classical political philosophy was concerned with, right? Because there is such a thing as an idea of justice, right, and an idea of what is right, and we really should not just be concerned with the lowest things in life, although we should be concerned with them because they are important, but they do not really represent the whole picture, and that's really what Strauss was trying to bring our attention to, right, is all of these other things that we miss out on.